What actually inspired me is I was down there visiting friends, and the friend pulled the car over to the side of the road because there's a marker at Dutchman's Curve, a historical marker, and it hadn't been there for a long time. It was somewhat newish at the time. So he wanted me to see it. So he started talking about it because I think it had gotten a little bit of press, etc. And I just found it fascinating that it was the deadliest train wreck in US history, and I'd never heard of it. And I got the idea from him that until maybe the last 10, 15 years, not that many people really knew about it, even in Nashville. It wasn't that well known. So I came home and started researching, and there had only been one book written about it, and it had just been written by a local Nashville woman who is a bit of a historian, but also kind of doing it as a hobby. She's very active in preserving cemeteries and things like that. So this became a labor of love for her. So she wrote a book about it, nonfiction. The first third is the accident. The second third of the book is about the trial that happened later. The engineer's family sued the railroad and the investigation that had happened. And I just found it fascinating that nobody had written anything. There was no fiction about it. It was briefly mentioned in some books about trains, but it really had gotten no attention. And I think because it was during World War One and then followed quickly by the Spanish flu, it just became a footnote in history. And I thought it was something worth writing about. The complexities, the reason I set it up that way is because my mind initially went to a Titanic type, the movie, framing it with someone who could tell you something about the story. So 1988 fit because it was 70 years later, and I could have someone who knew about the accident, who was still alive, but it was long forgotten. So people didn't know about it. So no one knew about it really until she started talking about it. So it was sort of a setup, a way to frame the story. That's why I did it that way. Originally, when I drafted this story, it was framed differently. It was completely different characters. It's been through different iterations, so I don't even actually remember exactly who all of them were. When I landed on Ginny, it just felt right to have this woman sort of discover it and be in a situation where she had the time to sit and listen to this woman tell her story. And also thinking about someone having this story deep inside them that they've been dying to tell and no one really caring. So the two sort of met head on. And I felt like that worked as a way to get the story out there. Young men who were in the Jim Crow car traveling to Nashville to go work at the gunpowder plant. I've taken them and sort of created a character to represent them. So she chose a young man who I do use him, but I use him as a friend. He's not the main character. That my main character is meant to represent all these young men. As you can imagine, the history and what you can find is kind of difficult. You go through ancestry.com and newspapers and all kinds of things like that. And there were also many people who were not ever identified. So that's why I really wanted to take one man and have him beautifully, I hope beautifully, represent these young men who were traveling. And then my thief is completely fictional, but there were some jewels on that train. And so originally I thought about doing something tied in with that, but for some reason, it didn't work for me. I didn't like the way it worked out. And I've always been a little bit fascinated by how train robberies were still a thing for a long time. So I just put that in there.